the reason hypnosis works for PTSD and hardly anything else does is because it's a subconscious injury. It's buried right down deep inside. And you're using a subconscious method to get down to that subconscious injury. So if you look at the Freud's iceberg, then it makes sense that the ego is the self. So the person who is living your life and you are enjoying your life as that self also has these other parts that are either accessible or not accessible. So imagine that half of what's above the surface is you, how you think, what you do every day, what you like, what you don't like. The other half of that person that's above the surface is your conscience. So the one that sits there going, you really shouldn't do that. You know, don't do that. Don't eat that chocolate biscuit. Don't shout at your husband. Don't do this. Don't do that. So that's your super ego in Freud's terms. And the super ego is above and below the surface. So you can hear the super ego. You can hear it talking to you, telling you what to do and what not to do. Down below, you've got the id, the id, which is where all the parts of you that were hurt, all the parts of you that were traumatized, upset, angry, are inside that below the surface part of the iceberg. And the id is half of what's below the iceberg, and the superego, the conscience, extends down to what's below the iceberg. And that superego, the conscience, has a dual job. One, it's got to keep you on the straight and narrow so that you don't do anything you shouldn't do. But the other part has got to keep the id on the straight and narrow. And this black line that you can see down the middle between the two parts of the lower surface iceberg is what Watkins calls the conflict ridge. So if you can imagine, the id doesn't give a stuff about anyone or anything except the person. The id is there to make sure the person survives, to keep that flame alight of that person. And it is primeval. It will do whatever it wants, whatever it thinks is required to keep you alive. It doesn't care what you think. You're above the surface. You can sit there all day and think, I hate being angry. I hate being upset. I hate eating too much. I hate this. I hate being anxious. I hate being depressed. It doesn't care. It only cares that you're still alive. And then the superego is also below the surface, saying to the id, calm down. Stop being difficult. You're making things too hard for her. You're making life too difficult. And the id is basically looking across at the superego down below the surface of your thing, doing this. It doesn't care what the superego says either. The id is in control, just as Freud said. You're not the master of your own house. And it's been called a submarine therapy, where you need to go down and explore the id. And when we do hypnosis, that's what we're doing. We're going down to find out what's in there. What did we stuff in there that we couldn't handle? What was put in there so that the self could carry on through life and be okay and not fall to bits every 2 seconds? And what is the battle that we're feeling when we've got PTSD inside us? You know, what is that nausea, that upset, that fear, that hurt? What is that? Where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from there. And how are you going to get down there with CBT or even EMDR, where you're only remembering what the things you remember? Now, everything you remember is in the self, in the ego. Everything that you can remember that happened to you in life is fully cognizant to the ego or the self. But that's not what's causing the trouble. You might think it is, but it's not. So we need to take the submarine down. And our job, I think, is to be a taxi driver, a submarine driver, to take the person down to the id, get them there, and then just shove them through the door and say, go in there and have a look around, see what's in there, what's causing these issues in you. So if your patient is the ego, the self. But also you've got to worry about the id, because the id's listening to you and it's watching you and it's listening to every word you say. If you say anything awful about the id, like, you know, it must be awful to have this horrible part inside of you causing massive problems, it'll be like, well, I'm not talking to you either, nor she. I'll make sure she doesn't come to the next session. So I always call hypnosis, maybe because of my background, you know, hostage negotiation meets couples counselling. So you are the self and the id, but the id is a hostile, difficult, unpleasant person sitting on the sofa next to you. And as a counsellor, as a hypnotherapist, you've got to get the two of them to talk, and you've got to stop that subconscious being subconscious and bring it into the conscious. And that's what we're trying to do. So you are taking your client down to look what's down there and to work out the problem. And this is one of my clients, an example of one of my clients who came in with paralysis and no explanation, no medical explanation of paralysis. What happened was, when we went into hypnosis and into deep hypnosis, she realized that all her life she had had a real compulsion to kill her father. And not just a, you know, I hate him, but a, I hate him. I want to finish him off. I want to kill him. And to stop her killing the father, the superego had paralyzed with the id, the self, so that it was not possible for her to go out and kill anybody, because her arm was paralyzed to her shoulder on her writing hand, so a shooting hand. So she would not have had the strength or the power to kill her father. So if you imagine, the id was so angry with what had happened to this woman at the hands of her father, that the compromise that the superego and the id had come to was that obviously she can't kill her father. That's immoral. That's not allowed. So they paralyzed the self's hand so that she couldn't do it. And this might sound fantastical, yeah, and you might be sitting there thinking, this woman's on some kind of drug. Well, what is she talking about? But this is what the patient explained. This is what the patient came back and said, and was told in hypnosis that that was the situation, and that was why she was feeling that way. So, and that's why and as soon as she understood this compulsion to kill her father, and she understood why, because she never really understood why she was so angry with him, when she understood it and she saw it, and she saw what had happened and why she'd been paralyzed in this way, paralysis vanished. It wasn't required anymore, because now she understood. And that level of understanding is what this particular protocol can bring.